Everyone tells you to be respectful, and that sounds right until you start losing sales you should have won. You're not rude, you're not unprofessional, so why aren't you closing? It's because what you think is respect isn't. I'm Josh, the sales guy, and this is Improve or Die Trying. And today we're breaking down why most salespeople think being respectful helps them to win more sales. It doesn't. And worst of all, it's the reason you keep losing sales you think you already have in the bag. You think you're being respectful. You don't interrupt, you don't challenge, you don't push. You let the customer talk. You nod and you stay agreeable. And in your mind, that's the right way to sell. So you feel like you're doing everything right, but you're still not closing the sale. You don't even know where the sale derailed. And that's the problem. Let me show you what this looks like. Years ago, I was in new homes. And like always, they'd bring in new sales reps to shadow the more successful agents. And I had this one guy with me for a couple of weeks. And at the same time, I was working with a young woman, and she had just graduated from college, saved up money for a couple of years, and just got a job as a local teacher. She wanted to buy a home that was near her parents. Great family, but nervous. Big decision. One day I see her and her mom walking by with her dog. So I stepped outside just to say hi, and my shadow follows me. We start talking and the conversation shifts. So I say something that challenges the way she's thinking. And then I just let it sit. Because in that moment, that's where the decision was actually going to be made. It got quiet. A little uncomfortable, probably. Exactly where it needed to be. And right as that moment was doing its job, my shadow jumps in, starts talking. He wants to lighten the mood, break that tension. The conversation ended and they left. Afterwards, I turned to him and I said, "You should never interrupt silence, because silence is where most people think." A couple of days later, she bought. And a few months later, that rep, never having learned the lesson, washed out. In that moment, he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was being respectful, not interrupting, making it awkward. He wasn't putting pressure on it. And that's what most salespeople do. They feel the tension and they rush to remove it. They feel the silence. They soften the moment. They move past it as quickly as possible. Not because the buyer needed it, but because they did. Because that's not respect. What that is avoidance. The discomfort you feel in that moment is yours. The buyer is thinking, and you're the one reacting. And instead of staying in it, you try to relieve it. You smooth it over, and you move past it. You give it as much space as you can, and then you call it respect, or maybe you call it professionalism. You call it not being pushy. But let's call it what it really is. You're trying to escape the moment. Not because the buyer is done, but because it got uncomfortable. And that discomfort, that's fear. Fear of making it awkward. Fear of hearing something that you don't want to hear. Fear that the sale isn't as solid as you thought. So you leave. And you leave the buyer alone with uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't close deals. It sends them looking for answers from your competition, from Google, from friends who weren't even in the room. And now you don't control the decision anymore. And that's the sale you thought you still had. So what do you do instead? You stay. When it gets quiet, you don't rush to fill it. You let it sit. Because that moment is where the decision is forming. And instead of smoothing it over, you lean in. You ask one more question. Walk me through what's holding you back. And then you listen. Not to respond, but to understand. Because most buyers don't need more information at that point. They need help thinking. And if you leave in that moment, they just don't get clarity. They get uncertainty. And uncertainty, we already know what that does. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to push. You just need to be steady when the moment gets uncomfortable. Because if you can't be what the client needs in that moment, they will find it somewhere else. And now you're not part of the decision anymore. That's why you have to become comfortable with your own discomfort. Not only will you win more sales, but more importantly, you'll guide more people the clarity and understanding that they need to make the right decision. Today's video challenge is this. The next time you're with a client and discomfort shows up, you feel the silence and you feel the tension, don't talk. Stay in it. And when the time is right, ask that one question and let it sit. No rescuing, no filling the space, just hold it and watch what happens. Watch how they start to think, how they start to open up, and how the real decision begins to form. Because that moment is where the sale actually lives or dies. And this is the part most salespeople never understand. It's not about saying more. It's about staying when most people would leave. It's about holding the moment when most people want to escape it. Because the sale isn't won in the pitch. It's won in the silence after. And if you can't sit there calm, steady, and in control, you didn't lose the deal because of price. You lost it because you left in the wrong moment. So next time you feel it, when you are in that moment, when the air gets quiet and the client leans back, when everything you want in you wants to fill that space, don't. Just be quiet and stay. Because that moment is where trust is built. It's where decisions are made. It's where sales are actually won or lost. It's where you have to be comfortable in the moment. And most people walk away from it. Don't be most people. Be the one who can sit in it, control it, and guide it. Because in this profession, you're not just selling a product. You're guiding people through one of the biggest decisions they'll make. So be steady enough to lead them through it. If this hit you, drop a comment. Tell me where you felt this moment and what you did. And be honest, not for me, but for you. Because the moment you see it, you can fix it. And if you're serious about getting better, subscribe. Because everything here is about one thing: becoming the person this job actually requires. I'm Josh, the sales guy, and this channel is about sales, influence, and becoming better at the craft. And in this profession, there are only two options: improve or die trying.